You could see it coming. If you look at the planetary situation yesterday, in tandem with McCarthy being removed as Speaker, and you look at the lesser players first to add symbolism and to provide triggers, you do see that, for example, the transiting Sun in the 10-degree Libra range puts it opposite Eris. And this is classic turmoil, chaos, and disagreement around relationships with the group, where Eris is 11th sign. The group basically is the caucus that he is, or was rather, in charge of. So that definitely fits really well. If you look at the lunar position in Gemini, that doesn't do too much. In fact, I would argue that this one was actually pretty good, but obviously the moon is not going to save you if everything else is coming after you. Mercury, though, a little more symbolic in that over here in late Virgo near Mars, that will also exacerbate the situation, also pointing it back to the group through Mars ruling Aries over here. And then, if we look at Venus, it appears to be doing nothing in the 25-degree Leo range. However, it is in a pretty tight sesqui square to Eris, and therefore is another point in this drama that is working against McCarthy. And the Mars in Libra at 24 plus degrees, that would be a point that I would not count as particularly problematic in this scenario. But if we go to the outer planets now for ever-growing significance, then we see among this group here, Neptune in the 26-degree range simply isn't all that helpful. It's not directly challenging anything just now. However, it's telegraphing that it's going toward the opposition to Mars, which probably isn't good in this scenario or in any other scenario. However, this particular timing, it's not all that active. And then if we put Eris on the map, again, not much there in the 25th degree of Aries. Pluto, if anything, I think helped him to at least pass the resolution to keep the government open. Trining the Mars, as far as that went, he was able to keep the group in order. They passed something, and so the government stays open for another few weeks. When we look at the last three, however, Jupiter is not helpful in that Jupiter is in the early degrees of, or rather moving toward the early degrees of Taurus, therefore signaling its approaching square to the Sun. And where it is in the middle of Taurus is not particularly helpful. It's all too close to that original opposition it makes to Neptune in the chart, thereby triggering disagreements with coworkers, that's the 6th house, and therefore linking it to, again, the key issue in this drama, which was that he could not get everyone on board. So Jupiter, despite being the great benefic, was not helpful. And then if we look at Uranus, it gets even more problematic because Uranus right now is in the 21 plus degree. You see it here. It's 2233. However, if we look at the ephemeris, we see that Uranus had already crossed through the 19th degree as far back as August of 22. And then again this year, you see it there, 19th degree in May. And you can extend this further and see that it is yet to complete that 19th degree pattern in January. In other words, the 19th degree is very active, meaning his Neptune here is getting opposed. And this really adds fuel to the fire around disagreement and the inability to come to some kind of successful conclusion on the matter. But having said all that, the kingpin, the one that really took care of business in terms of removing this man from his job, is the Saturn. And it's really the planet that I've always felt would be his demise, because you can see now through a different view here, if I move the screen to this, we put the Saturn up here, and we see that the whole year, this is showing from September, but Saturn has been in Pisces since March, has already crossed through these degrees, now crossing through them again, and is due to station at 0. The point being, he's in the heart of his Saturn return, thereby triggering the square to the moon and basically dooming his position. Now, what is interesting about McCarthy is that if we go back to this one, then we see that down here in the close to the election period, you can see the transit in Jupiter there at 21 degrees Gemini. This would suggest to me that he is likely to be re-elected to the House. if he wants to do that, and I suspect he probably will, because when I looked at his chart from a different vantage point, the lunations that are shown by progressions, his next major lunation is going to happen in 2030, so he's still years away from a major shift in direction. Now, it doesn't have to be exactly 2030, but it would generally be close to that, and we're nowhere near close to that. So I would say it's unlikely that this guy would quit his present job, given that when we go to next year, Jupiter crossing through here is so favorable. And I have to add, that's a bit of a relief in terms of looking at the outcome of the next election, because when I had looked at his chart for next year, I would have considered the fact that his Jupiter is so strong then by being in his ascending sign and trining his Aquarius sun. I would have thought that would be potential problem around Democrats winning the election. And now that particular correlation has been removed. I'll mention separately that Kamala Harris also has Gemini rising, and so that cycle of Jupiter is very favorable for her in 2024. And I would consider that something that I would add as a definite plus around the re-election of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. In summary, though, the key player, Saturn, no doubt about it. This is a very tough Saturn return, in the context of the way this man plays. And I don't believe he plays very well. I've said this for years. I don't think he's competent. He's also not honest. And his competence takes him to places that lead him into actions that are counterproductive. And so, for example, in this most recent scenario, he went out of his way to attack Democrats after they helped him to pass the resolution that allowed the government to stay open. There was no need for that. That's the moment to do politics, to talk to the Democrats, or maybe even prior to passing the resolution and saying, can you keep me there? Can we make this a gentleman's agreement? He didn't do that. He basically got it done, but then immediately went on TV to attack Democrats, which means they're not going to trust him. They don't trust him for all kinds of other reasons, but they're certainly not going to trust him then at the key moment. So, bottom line, this guy actually has a pretty good chart. Grand trine in Earth, the squares add ambition. They're actually useful. They're just not useful right now, unfortunately for him. And to be honest, I know that many are saying what is likely to happen next is an even worse speaker. Perhaps. But this man, quite honestly, has no business being speaker because he's not suited for the job at all. So I'll end by inviting you to continue watching. The rest of the video is a repost of a video that I posted in January of this year, where I talk about what was likely to happen to Kevin McCarthy's speakership position. So here we are at the height of the full moon, and it's starting to look like Kevin McCarthy may just become the next House Speaker after failing on 13 consecutive attempts. Unfortunately, to get the post, he has given up a lot of his ability to maintain control of his group, and some even say he has made so many unwise concessions that for all intents and purposes, the House is going to be run by the inmates instead of the warden. And it's not like he's a particularly good warden either, so in the final analysis, the whole thing is one giant sorry mess. This is what happens to a party when it drifts into destructive ideas and people over a period of many years, because most think it goes back to the days of the Tea Party in 2010, and then accelerated dramatically during the Trump years, and now culminates with the election of a group of insurrectionists, cranks, and weirdos that are far more interested in getting attention on social media and on TV than in the work of governing the country and honoring the Constitution. And we do need to realize that McCarthy simply isn't the sharpest pencil in the drawer. I remember back in 2015, when he made an attempt to gain the speakership and lost out to Paul Ryan. It was relatively easy to notice that he's not particularly suited to the job of speaker because, to be quite frank, he's not a skillful speaker and/or communicator. He has relied solely on his ambition to get the job at all costs and on his everyman affability that helps him to be chummy with a lot of House members. And since the bulk of these House members aren't particularly bright either, the combination sort of works, but not to the benefit of the Republican Party, and even less to the best interests of the nation, because now we are faced with enduring a House of Representatives filled with dimwits and traitors being led by someone barely above the level of dimwit. And now here's the thing, even though the prevailing opinion is that he is almost certain to lock up the speakership by tonight, I wouldn't count my chickens until they're well and fully hatched, because the current astrology is not particularly smooth. Indeed, as evidenced by the embarrassment of 13 failed vote counts. It couldn't possibly be, and really the only change that has taken place relates to being on the full moon, which does tend to reflect the moment of fulfillment and could indeed help him to achieve his desired outcome. Though even then, I would only place his odds of doing it tonight at perhaps 75%. The full moon can be good, but it's never a perfect guarantee and sometimes correlates with the crash of the entire enterprise, especially when the quest has not been well prepared, and this one definitely has not been. However, let's surmise that he does get the job. Then he would be dealing with an entirely different problem. For one thing, this victory would happen under a full moon, yes, but also with Mercury and Mars both retrograde, which typically isn't where you would want these planets if you want something of this nature to stick and last for a decent period of time. Planets in retrograde are seldom a big problem in an individual's life dealing with relatively ordinary problems, but if you're a politician, there are a lot of forces that you really cannot control, and most especially in this case when his job will involve managing a whole lot of very unmanageable, often crazy and delusional people. So with that in mind, retro Mercury and Mars definitely would not be my favorite choice. Nor would it be my choice to have Uranus transiting in a station square in the midheaven, which is sort of okay in that his natal Uranus is a harmonious planet, and so in a square can be just the right stimulus to make something happen. But a square is a square, and aside from the possibility that it could stop you in your tracks and defeat you, also sets the tone for your speakership and means there will be a constant instability and unpredictability that could make the job impossible. And worst of all is the fact that this is the year of his second Saturn return, a Saturn that is elevated at the zenith and therefore quite powerful, but also tightly square the moon as well as the ascendant-descendant horizon line. And the Saturn transit is going to trigger this square multiple times over the next year, which means he is in for a really rough ride that extends into early 2024, and there will be multiple moments during spring, summer, fall, and winter when his job will be at serious risk. In fact, I would be completely amazed if this guy survives until next spring.